Whoa! Hello folks, welcome to Netcruzer RC. We're down in the RC workshop. We're going to do something that we've not done ever before, which is work with some beta level 3D printed parts to do a cool conversion on a Kyosho Mini-Z. So this is my box stock Kyosho Mini-Z MR03. This started out as a C8 Corvette. That's the body that I purchased, and this was actually a really good racing body, but I broke the wing and kind of retired it before it got too ruined. And then I made this McLaren P1 off of the white auto scale and painted it up, and I raced it of the 24 through 2025 season. Now we're at the end of 25, going into 2026, and I've kind of had my experience running box stock in Kyosho Mini-Z. It's a fun class, but I've never really liked how it handled. It's an idea to take a box stock and merge it into a new class without having to buy an Evo, without having to go brushless, and without needing to spend a whole lot of money. And that's with the help of 3D printing. So what is in this box is by a new company called RC Pro 3D. rcpro3d.com is the website, and on there you can download STL files for your home 3D printer. Now I personally don't have a 3D printer, so I got the owner to print me up some parts so I could try this out for him and do some R&D and some testing with what I plan to do here. What this allows you to do is to take a Kyosho Mini-Z and convert it into a rules-ready, legal F1 car. He printed me off a pretty cool double color, silver and blue. So we'll get this kind of mocked up on the body and see how it goes. Here's all of the parts to do a Mini-Z to F1 conversion. You can also choose to purchase a full chassis, full car, so you don't need to start with the Mini-Z. You can just print off your own F1 car, and then you'd have to find electronics that fit in it and build out an F1 car that way. Or the easier way, I think, is to take your box stock Mini-Z and convert it into an F1. That's what most of my local people around me have been doing, and I got to test drive one for a couple laps one day, and it's remarkable how much better it handles over your box stock kind of setup that you can get on a Mini-Z, because you get more downforce and more tire, which I'll explain. Let me just get at all the parts here. I'll move the camera down even a little bit closer, and I'll get at all the parts out of this box so we can go over the parts and what I plan on doing. Okay, so my box stock car, I am starting from an MR03. You can also do it from an MR04. Going from an MR04 to an F1 is actually easier, and what I'm going to do is a little bit of a test of going from an MR03 to a hybrid setup of having the parts, the chassis ability to merge onto an MR03, but then I'm going to put on an MR04 LM rear pod. Now the LM rear pod is the same on an 03 and an 04. The reason why I'm doing that is because the rear pod on a stock MR03 sits up too high, and it interferes with the F1 style body. It would interfere with it. So I'm going to be testing if this F1 body will work with an LM rear pod on an 03, because the other issue with an LM pod is the LM pod comes with a disc damper on the top, which does add a little bit of Z height, but not a ton. So I'm curious if this is all going to work, and that's partially what I'm testing, is MR03 chassis with a LM rear pod. Does this work with this RC 3D Pro? Here's the F1 body. When you look on his website, there are two different looks of the F1 body. There's a skinnier looking one. The skinnier looking one would bolt up to this MR03 exactly. As things currently stand, and things are subject to change very quickly with this because this is a beta prototyping type situation, this is the 04 style look, but it will have the ability to bolt up to an 03 as long as you change the rear pod to an 04 style pod, and I'll show you the parts that come with it. So I showed you this part first. This is the main body. This is the nose piece. We have the rear wing, which is a modern 2022 and newer style looking rear wing, so that will bolt up. And we have a couple more. There's only 2 more blue parts in here, which is these little arrow wings. And those go onto the front wing. So these will bolt onto this to create a front wing. And you've got the nose, then you've got the body, then you've got the rear wing. And the rest of these parts are the parts that make it convert from a Mini-Z into an F1. So we have the chassis plate, we have a steering rack, and we have arms. And the arms are cool because they're designed for kind of cantilever style. It moves your shocks sideways versus up and down. So I'm not entirely sure exactly how that all comes together, but that will be part of it, as well as some other aesthetic things. We have some rear view mirrors. I think they just stick onto the top of the nose here, as well as what looks like some sort of a front block, front suspension block. I need to figure out how that works in. And then this is optional, wheels. So I mentioned that the wheels are different. On a normal Mini-Z, the wheels are 8.5 millimeter fronts and 11 millimeter rears. To go to F1 regulation, your typical rears become fronts. So these 11 mil rears will go to the front. And I could reuse these if I wanted to, but I got other wheels printed by RC3D Pro. So this is a 14 millimeter wheel. I'm talking width. So the width of it is a 14 millimeter, and then the fronts will become 11. So they handle so much better is because you've got much more aero as well as much more tire. So you're now an 11 millimeter front and a 14 millimeter rear tire. Let's take all of this stuff, and then I will start on tearing apart my MR03 and kind of mocking up those parts and figuring out how that works, because this is going to take me a while to figure out how to do it all. And almost all the screws you need to do it are going to be reused from your Mini-Z, but there are about 5 or 6 screws that you will need to kind of bolt the body together, and they're just little mini self-tappings, but you would have to procure these yourself because you can't print screws, and you do need to screw this together. That information is on the website for the screws that you need to bolt this together, so we will get started on that, and I'll come back when some of this is screwed together. Some of the stuff is fairly self-explanatory how it goes together. You get your F1 look together, and this front wing does mount into the bottom of the chassis plate like so, and then you'll screw that together. But again, I'm not sure if you do this at what order you do this. So the owner of the RC3D Pro does have one overview video, overhead video of originally screwed together version, so I'm going to watch that, and then the rest of it just kind of clips on like a normal Mini-Z. It will end up being a friction fit, just like your stock type of clip-on body will be the same type of system on how it adheres. You just kind of click it on once everything's set up to run it. First thing I'm going to do in preparation is just bolt the arrow to the front wing, and that will be 4 screws. These are 4 pieces. They're all just friction fit together right now. This chassis plate, the front wing, and the 2 blue arrow fins. I'm going to screw together the front arrow fins with the smallest little black screws that I have. I'm just going to put those 4. I have 4 of these. I'm going to put these 4 screws in the bottom of the wing and just attach that front arrow as my step 1. My step 2 is going to be taking my MR03 and removing the 4 screws on the top of the servo motor cover and pulling this off. And then the wheels and the springs and all this stuff just kind of falls off the car as soon as you do that. So your front wheel, A-arm, your front springs, and 4 little shims will pop out once you undo those 4 screws and lift this top plate up off the top of the car. It is clipped on to the back. It is clipped. You just kind of manipulate it and get it up out of the way. Also, with that off, my next step is I'm going to remove my rear pod because I'm going to be changing it out. So I know that I don't need to keep it on the car. I'm going to remove it. So I will be taking out the bottom screws from this T-plate, removing that, and the only thing that's holding the motor pod onto the front end of the car is your 2 motor wires, which you just need to undo off of the circuit board there. It's pretty self-explanatory where that plugs in once you can see it. Screws with the copper plates, you just unscrew those, and then you'll be able to pull the whole rear end off of the car. Just like that, 2 to 3 screws later, I now have my rear pod off of the back of the car. This is a MR03 rear pod, which I will not be using. I will be swapping out to the 04 LM pod. And also, I forgot to mention that when you go to the F1 spec, you are replacing your box stock motor with a, oh, I don't have it here, an X-Speed, which is the hotter end version of the brushed motor. So I will be replacing this whole unit with a LM and a new motor as part of this conversion, but really the meat of this is going to be how do I take this, which is my MR03, and move that into this F1 spec. So here is the top of my servo plate, as well as my front arms are dangling here with the pins. I did previously do a pin flip on the MR03. If you have not done that, it will look a little bit different. You won't have the pin in this, it would be the pin in this side. Anyway, it's just a reversal of how that worked. The pin that is currently sitting in the top of my arms, I do need that for the new F1, so I'm just going to pop those out by just kind of leveraging them out. So I'm going to pop the pins out, you do need them. And I believe the rest of this on an MR03 is no longer used, but I'm going to just set it aside. There's still the 4 screws in this that I had taken it off with. Those will be reused, so make sure you don't lose them and keep them on hand. And then the next step will be the top is off of the MR03. Now flip it over and remove the bottom suspension plate, which includes the bottom A-arms and these pivot balls, because you are going to need those. This is the bottom plate coming off, the 4 screws being loosened off. Just pop that off, as well as I will be able to take off this front little nose piece too for the bodies, and your steering rack just friction fits in, so you can remove that too. At this point, from the bottom plate, I want to remove these metal pivot balls and put them onto the F1 pivot ball positions. So you want to pop them into here, as well as I'm going to continue screwing this together. This main piece to the wing is one 6mm and one 8mm. The 8mm goes on the, whoops, the 8mm goes on the further back position, and it sticks up to be screwed into the nose cone later. Working on getting the pivot balls in, I was able to pry them out of the old piece just by using one of the screws to just kind of leverage it out. Make sure you don't fling it across the room, and then I am pinching it in to the new part with needle nose pliers. Well, these pliers are pretty big, but just want to make sure you don't fling them across the room. There you go. And now your pivot balls are in, as well as here's the screws in place of the front nose piece. You notice the longer one sticking out the rear of it. Okay. Now we're going to assemble that front end part onto the chassis. So this is the bottom of the chassis with the previous parts removed. You're going to take your new steering rack, find the bottom of it by looking for that little raised notch. That notch goes onto the servo arm actuator, which might be a little hard to see, but it's that little nub there. So you just want to make sure that you get that lined up on your nub, because that is what moves it. If you're out of alignment, then you won't have steering. So just make sure you get that on the right position so that when you can move it back and forth, you hear your servo moving. So I just misaligned it, I missed it. Now I've got to get it back on. So that is correct. Take your new front end, line that up on your holes, sandwiches that in place. Make sure your servo arms is still moving, and then screw it in with the 4 screws from your bottom plate. That will attach the F1 front end onto the bottom of the car. After getting the bottom of the F1 onto the chassis of the front, now you're going to work on getting the upper suspension done. So this is where you're going to take that little block, and it is directional. To get it together, you're going to put the 2 new 8mm screws into the center of it, as well as you're going to need your hinge pin screws from the front of your old arms. So that's what this is pivoting on. Remove that pin and then ream it out so that it fits nicely into this block. Also, this hinge pin block screw is extra small, so I'm using my extra small Phillips. Everything else I've been taking apart using a small JIS screwdriver. This is a Tamiya one, but you can get Kyosho. But I have had to go to a smaller bit to get that hinge pin screw out. It is extremely small, and so it's just a little pin with a few threads on it, and this is what's going to hold your arms on your new one. Now, his little video instructions say to make sure that you ream out the holes in that front block so that you don't snap off these hinge pin ears. I don't have a reamer that small, so what I'm doing is I'm using the hinge pin and I'm just rotating it in and out of that hole a few times and just making sure that it's not too tight. That's how I'm reaming out the holes in the outer ears of this before screwing it all together. Alright, I believe I have this together correctly now. I'm just going to try and show you how to tell. So my screw's poking through the top, and I've got plenty of down travel, but my up travel is limited. So that means lip on the top is in the correct position, and this is the orientation that I've built it. So just so you can see how that works, the hinge pin screws are on this side of the way the arm is angled. Also, I have to reuse this knuckle and get the bearings out of these wheels as well. So I'm going to get my knuckles off these wheels for the next step. Alright, we're now at the point of some experimentation and trying to figure out how the geometry is going to work out on a MR03 with these current revision parts. The other interesting thing to note about this piece is it is not symmetrical up and down and backwards and forwards. So you have to make sure that you have it where you have limited up travel. So that's top, we talked about that. But also you'll notice these screws, maybe it's hard to tell, but these screws are not centered in the block. So that will change your caster. And currently on the MR03 I have to run it with more material towards the front because there is a bit of an issue with the MR03 knuckles being a bigger part than the MR04s and it interfering with the steering rack somehow. When you put this on, you do have to run it that way with more material towards the front on your MR03 until I come up with a revision to the steering, and we'll try that. The other thing I wasn't sure on is these here are my 4 little shims which normally sit one on top and bottom of this. This goes through the knuckle like this, right? And on the box stock on an MR03, there's a shim on the top and the bottom. I'm going to run it without these shims because every time you get in a crash or have to maintain it, these shims pop out and they're very hard to keep track of. They're just 4 little plastic shims. I'm not going to run them. I'm going to build this without them and see how bad or good the geometry is, and we'll go from there. What I'm doing is taking the front end of this and put your knuckle in. Left and right knuckles, they'll only go in correctly one way. You're putting the little down horn into the steering rack, lining up your hole with the bottom pivot, and then you're going to drop in your hinge pin. This is with an MR03 with the hinge pin flip. If you didn't have a hinge pin flip, it'll be slightly different. You're just going to have to use some of your brain to figure out how this will go together. I'm just going to pop this in, get it in there, and then we'll set it down. So now the knuckles and the pins are in, and then we're going to take this, my top plate, the new F1 piece, and get it aligned, and then try and pop it onto these hinge pin balls. Alright, I'm going to have to... Oh, there's one side. I'll just keep working on it. You want it to pop the ball into the upper arm and then screw it in place. Okay, so I've got it on there, but I've got a lot of forward kingpin inclination, I guess, caster. So I actually might flip this around the opposite direction with more material towards the rear, because this isn't really looking like it would be a problem the other way, and I'm not sure that I want my kingpins that far facing forward. I would rather have them rearward or more up and down. So let me flip that around and see if it improves that geometry, because that'll work, but under a compression, the steering knuckle might end up popping right out of that steering rack. So anyway, I'm going to play around with this and see if I get it better. I ended up flipping it around the other way. I broke a screw off inside. I had to extract it. But yes, more material towards the rear does work. Gives you, and I see no problem with that. I don't know what the other issue was, why they was saying you had to flip it around, but that seems like a better geometry. And actually this binds up worse. The steering, you hear that? Steering binds up on an MR03 style front knuckle. The steering rack needs to be changed, which is that this part here, that's the rectangle, that needs to be revised so that this doesn't bind up like this, because it is hitting this knuckle, and that's what's causing that jamming. So I probably shouldn't just keep doing that. All right, I'm giving you all the updates as I go, and I've been spending a lot of time back and forth on this. I cannot put on an 04 knuckle into the 03 pivot ball. The pivot ball is too small for the 04 knuckle to fit in. I've gone back to the 03 knuckles. It just has the binding steering, but to fix that, it just needs a new steering rack. Now I'm screwing on the top of the front nose plate with the 4 top servo mounting screws, and then the bottom screw that was loose goes up through the bottom into the nose piece. All right, wardrobe change. It's now a week or so later. The battery ran out on my camera, and then I had to go to a race. So I've now raced this car, and wow, it works great. A couple of things that that went right and went wrong with it. So first of all, the build is finished, and there wasn't too much more left to do. I believe I was just installing the front end together when the battery died. The rest of it's fairly intuitive. This section pops on and off. The thing I did need to do was fully build out a rear pod. Like I mentioned, this kit is designed to work with MR4 MM rear pods. I don't have one. I have a LM rear pod, and I'm happy to say that it works, but if you are racing this in a F1 league that is very stickler on the rules, they may not allow it, because this moves my wheelbase 4 millimeters rear. So my overall wheelbase is 4 millimeters beyond the allowed spec. But even with the disc damper that's on top of the LM and it moving out 4 millimeters, it clears this design of the wing mount over the pod, and the body shell also fits without interfering. It's extremely close, and it looks a little goofy because the wheels are a little bit too much to the rear, but it does clear its wing mount. It looks like it almost doesn't, but it doesn't seem to interfere. As well as there's a couple different wings you can get now. He's going to have option parts available on this website that you may want to change. He's looking at changing the front nose shape, because one of the downsides of this platform is if you stuff it into the curb, the wedge shape gets stuck under the curb and you can't back yourself out, and then you have to get marshaled. That's really the only downside that I've seen so far with this F1 car. Also, he's going to have different rear wings available for different downforce levels and different looks. My halo is now missing because it broke. One of the things that we tried with my car was a multiple colored print, and as cool as it looked, the adhesion layers between colors made it a little bit weak, so my halo had different colors in it and it snapped off, as well as where my rear wing mounts. There's a small little hairline crack there from when I put the screws in, which also is likely because of maybe the colors, but also maybe not. The screws that you put in here, his website says 8 millimeters. The screws that I had were longer, and I think that's also why it cracked. So just try and keep it to 8 mil, and then you may not crack that rear. Like any printing, you might end up having some little defects in your print that may require you to reprint a piece or to make a small adjustment in your file. Again, I don't have a printer, so I don't really do that stuff. I've had this made for me, and so far it's working great. The thing that we did run into, like I said, this is a beta type situation, so there was some learning factors, because this is one of the first cars that was tested with going with the MR03 to an MR04 rear pod with the MR04 looking body kit on it. And there was a problem with the steering rack that I showed, where the binding of the steering was an issue. That has been solved. This steering rack, which is the rectangular piece that makes the steering work, It just needed to be adjusted for MR03 knuckles. So if you're building out a certain type of car, if you want to run an MR04 front knuckle, then you can use the steering plate that I had. But if you're going to build it out on an MR03, then there is now a revision which includes the proper type of steering rack that makes that work without binding. It just needed to move this rear support piece so it didn't interfere with the chassis and the knuckles, because the knuckles are a different type of spacing on an MR03. Transponders sit in the area there. When you do have the halo on, that all works great. I was able to do my first race with the halo, and then it got broken after the race actually in transit, which is kind of weird, and then got lost. The driving performance of these F1 cars is really, really good. I am using 3D printed wheels that are also available from RC Pro 3D. The offset, I believe, is the plus 2mm offset is what you want for ideal track width and all of that, as well as I have a standard T-plate on here, but I am running it in the LM position. The other thing I ran into was the LM pods. Not recommended, because on an LM pod you cannot actually move this forward without it binding. So you do need to run it in what is typically an LM style configuration. Again, I would not recommend that. I'm using this because I had one. I may end up buying a 04mm pod, which is what this whole thing is designed to use. For now, I actually have a race tonight, and that'll be my first time racing with this proper steering rack on. So my first race, I will show you a clip of running it where we had to actually cut my steering rack, and my steering was a little loose, a little wonky. So the cool thing about these is, for a box stock car, how much better the grip and handling is with the extra tire, because you have a 11mm tire on the front and a 14mm tire on the rear, and the X-Speed faster motor, but otherwise all the same setup as a box stock car. You're allowed to change springs and do some other minor tweaks, but it doesn't need it. I am on a orange front spring and a friction rear shock, but I have the disc damper because I do have an LM pod in here, which is pretty much the only different thing versus everyone else. And I'm very impressed with how this thing works. It doesn't dart off on the straightaway, which is great. But I was able to qualify second overall in that race. I was very happy with that. So tonight will be my first time racing this with proper steering setup. I will still be on the longer wheelbase LM. For mounting this body on and off the car, something I did notice you have to do if you're running a hardwired transponder, which means you're connecting it to the posts on either side, you do need to bend them down, because if they're bent up, previously I used to run them in a up configuration, and it will hit the body. So you do need to just bend those down, make sure everything's as low as possible, and then the body just fits on over. We'll be racing this tonight in my club league, and we will see how it performs with the steering system set up properly. This is my first time racing the F1 with the fixed steering rack.
Okay, hold on guys, I gotta fix the track.
So I have more steering than I did at the GFX race. I'm still on the LM pod. Whoops. Whoops. I hit the brakes, it ended up being full reverse.
First turn, it's gonna be chaos.
Whoa! Slow on the tone. Oh, sorry.
Took it later.
Oh.
Yeah, I can see your body clip.
Well, I can't turn that sharp.
Yeah, turn your jewelry up.
And then I'll come back in future videos and show you how things have modified with this car and how things are going with it. So if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. If you're not here to subscribe, if you want to talk to me, leave a comment down below. As always, thanks for watching. I will put links in the description down below.